The coughing started in June, just as the scorching heat settled over Keeler, California, like a heavy blanket. Gabrielle Reed covered her mouth with a handkerchief, the white fabric blooming crimson with blood, as the stagecoach rattled toward what she hoped would be her salvation, not her final resting place. It was 1875 when Gabrielle arrived in Keeler, a mining town nestled at the edge of Death Valley, her trunk containing little more than books, a few dresses, and medicine that had long since proved ineffective. At 23, she had come to terms with her failing lungs consumption. The doctors back east had called it, but not with dying alone in a city where no one knew her name. The stagecoach lurched to a stop before the town's only hotel, a two-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sign swinging in the hot, dry wind. Gabrielle gathered her skirts, preparing to descend, when a strong hand appeared before her. "Madam," a deep voice drawled, "allow me." She looked up into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a worn Stetson. The man couldn't have been more than 30, his broad shoulders filling out a faded blue shirt, a gun belt slung low on his hips. "Thank you," she managed before another cough racked her body. The stranger's eyes widened with concern as he helped her down. "You need a doctor, madam." "That's why I'm here," Gabrielle replied weakly. "I heard Dr. Fitzgerald in Keeler specializes in lung ailments." The man's expression darkened. "Doc Fitzgerald passed 6 months ago. We've got Dr. Peterson now, but—" He hesitated. "Let me take you to him anyway." Zachary Jameson had seen plenty of death in his 30 years, first during the war, then as a deputy, and now as the owner of the largest cattle ranch outside Keeler. But something about the delicate woman with auburn hair and emerald eyes struck him to his core. She was beautiful, yes, but it was the determination in her gaze, despite her obvious illness, that captured him. Dr. Peterson's office sat at the end of Keeler's Main Street, a modest building with a shingle proclaiming medical services. Zach watched as Gabrielle straightened her spine and smoothed her travel-worn dress before entering. "I'll wait for you," he said, surprising himself with the offer. She looked equally surprised but nodded with a grateful smile. "I won't be long." An hour passed before the door opened. Gabrielle's face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. Zach stood immediately from his place on the boardwalk bench. "What did he say?" he asked, though the answer was written across her features. "Winter," she whispered. "He gives me until winter." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips again. Zach felt a surge of protectiveness he couldn't explain. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me get you settled at the hotel. You need rest." Over the next 2 weeks, Zachary found himself drawn to Gabrielle's room at the Keeler Hotel almost daily. He brought her books from his own collection, fresh flowers from the meadows outside town, and news of the outside world. Despite her weakened state, her mind remained sharp, her wit quick, her laugh like music when he could coax it from her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the hotel's back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," Zach replied, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "I know you came all the way from Boston alone, despite your condition. I know you quote Shakespeare when you think no one's listening. I know you're braver than most men I've met." Gabrielle studied his profile, the strong jaw, the slight crease between his brows. "And I know you're avoiding my question, Mr. Jameson." He turned to her then, his expression serious. "Maybe I just don't want you to be alone." The simple honesty in his words brought tears to her eyes. "I've been alone for a long time," she admitted. "My parents died in a fire 3 years ago. The consumption came shortly after. The doctors in Boston gave me a year. I've outlived their prediction by 18 months. And you'll outlive Dr. Peterson's too, Zach said firmly. She smiled sadly. I don't think so. Not this time. 3 days later, Gabrielle collapsed in the hotel dining room. Zach, who had come to escort her on their now routine evening walk, carried her to Dr. Peterson's office, his heart pounding with fear. Her lungs are filling with fluid, the doctor explained after his examination. The disease is progressing faster than I anticipated. The heat isn't helping. She needs cool, clean air. My ranch, Zach said immediately. It's up in the foothills, cooler than town. I have a housekeeper who can help care for her. Dr. Peterson shook his head. Mr. Jameson, you need to understand. This woman is dying. Moving her might buy her a few more weeks, perhaps a month, but she won't see Christmas. Zach's jaw tightened. Then I'll give her the best weeks I can. When Gabrielle regained consciousness, Zach was at her bedside. She could see the worry etched on his face, the tension in his shoulders. It's bad, isn't it? She whispered. He took her hand in his, her delicate fingers almost disappearing in his calloused grasp. Doctor, Peterson thinks you do better at my ranch away from town. The air's cleaner up there. She studied him, seeing through the half-truth. He thinks I'm dying faster than he predicted. Zach didn't insult her intelligence by lying. Yes, Gabrielle closed her eyes, a single tear escaping. I don't want to be a burden to you. You could never be that, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Gabrielle, He hesitated, then squared his shoulders. Marry me. Her eyes flew open. What, marry me, he repeated. Let me take care of you for whatever time you have left. Have you lost your mind? She asked, though there was no anger in her tone, only bewilderment. I'm dying, Zach. Then love me now, he said simply. Live with me now. I don't care if it's 6 months or 6 days. I want to be your husband for whatever time we have. Gabrielle stared at him, searching his face for pity or obligation, but found only sincerity and something deeper, something that made her heart flutter despite her certainty that it was foolish to hope. Why would you tie yourself to a dying woman? She asked. Zach brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. Because in 2 weeks, you've brought more light into my life than I've known in years. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Gabrielle Reed, and I'd rather have you as my wife for 1 day than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. 2 days later, they were married in a simple ceremony in the town church. Gabrielle wore a pale blue dress hastily altered by the local seamstress, and Zach wore the only suit he owned. There were no guests save for Dr. Peterson, Zach's ranch foreman Thomas, and his housekeeper Mrs. Holloway. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher said, closing his Bible. You may kiss your bride. Zach's kiss was gentle, reverent, as if she were made of the finest porcelain. When they separated, Gabrielle saw tears in his eyes that mirrored her own. Mrs. Jameson, he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. The journey to Zach's ranch took nearly 3 hours by wagon, with frequent stops for Gabrielle to rest. The property sprawled across 500 acres of rolling hills and meadows, with a main house built of sturdy pine logs and river stone. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and welcoming, with wide porches and large windows that caught the breeze. It's beautiful, Gabrielle breathed as Zach carried her over the threshold. It was my father's, he explained, setting her gently in a comfortable chair by the fireplace. He came out here after the war between the states, started with nothing but 20 head of cattle and a dream. Built all this with his own hands. Where is he now? She asked. Passed 5 years ago. My mother followed a year later. Been just me since then, except for the ranch hands and misses. Holloway. Gabrielle reached for his hand. I'm sorry. He smiled, the sadness in his eyes fading. "Don't be. They lived good lives, and now I have you." The days fell into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Mrs. Holloway would help Gabrielle bathe and dress before serving breakfast on the east porch where they could watch the sunrise. Zach would join her when his morning chores were complete, and they would talk for hours about books, politics, their childhoods, their dreams. On good days, Zach would saddle his gentlest mare and take Gabrielle for slow rides around the property, her back pressed against his chest, his arms secure around her waist. On bad days, when the coughing spells left her exhausted, he would read to her by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder. Despite Dr. Peterson's warnings, July turned to August, and Gabrielle found her strength increasing slightly. The clean mountain air seemed to ease her breathing, and Mrs. Holloway's hearty meals helped her gain back some of the weight she'd lost. "You're good for her, Mrs. Holloway told Zach one evening as they stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as Gabrielle sat on the porch swing, sketching the sunset. "I haven't seen her use that handkerchief once today." "She's a fighter," Zach replied, his eyes never leaving his wife's slender form. "That she is. But it's more than that." The older woman placed a weathered hand on his arm. "She has something to live for now." Zach wanted to believe it, wanted to hope that the doctor was wrong, that love and clean air and sheer determination could overcome the disease ravaging Gabrielle's lungs. But late at night, when she slept beside him, he could hear the rattle in her chest, see the effort each breath required. They hadn't consummated their marriage. Zach wouldn't risk taxing her already fragile body, despite Gabrielle's tentative suggestions that she wanted more. Instead, he held her through the night, learning the contours of her face with his fingertips, memorizing the sound of her voice, the scent of her skin. "I wish I'd met you sooner," she told him one night as they lay in the darkness, her head on his chest. "I wish we had more time." "We have now," he reminded her, echoing the words he'd said when he proposed. "And I'll take whatever you can give me, Gabrielle." She lifted her head, finding his lips in the darkness. Her kiss was more insistent than usual, her hand sliding beneath his nightshirt to touch the warm skin of his chest. "Gabrielle," he whispered, catching her wrists gently. "We shouldn't." "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I want to know what it's like to be truly your wife, Zach." Just once before, he silenced her with a kiss. "Don't talk like that. And not because I don't want you, God knows I do, but because I won't risk hurting you." She laid her head back on his chest, and he felt the dampness of tears against his skin. "I'm sorry I can't be the wife you deserve." "You're exactly the wife I want," he assured her, stroking her hair. "Exactly as you are." September brought cooler temperatures and the first signs of autumn to the foothills. The aspens began to turn gold, and the mornings held a crispness that hadn't been there before. Dr. Peterson made the journey from town to check on Gabrielle, his surprise evident when he found her sitting up in the parlor, a book in her lap, color in her cheeks. "Mrs. Jameson," he said, setting his bag on the table. "I must say you look considerably better than when I last saw you." "I feel better," she replied with a smile. "The air up here agrees with me, I think." The doctor's examination was thorough, his expression growing more perplexed as he listened to her lungs, checked her pulse, examined her glands. "Well?" Zach asked when he finished, unable to contain his impatience. Dr. Peterson replaced his stethoscope in his bag with deliberate movements. "There is some improvement," he admitted. "The fluid in your lungs has decreased significantly. Your pulse is stronger." "But," he added, his tone cautious, "the disease is still there. The tuberculosis bacillus doesn't simply disappear, Mrs. Jameson." "But she's better," Zach pressed. "For now," the doctor conceded. "However, I must warn you both not to get your hopes too high. Winter will be the true test." The cold, The damp there particularly hard on lungs already compromised by consumption. After he left, Gabrielle found Zach in the barn, aggressively brushing down his stallion, his movements betraying his frustration. "He's just being honest," she said softly. Zach didn't turn around. "He's being pessimistic. He doesn't see what I see every day, how much stronger you're getting, how much longer you can walk without getting winded." "Zach." She placed a hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Look at me." He turned, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm not afraid anymore," she told him. "Whatever happens, if I have 3 months or 30 years, I'm not afraid, because of you." He pulled her into his arms then, burying his face in her hair. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "Not now, not when I've just found you." "Then don't waste a moment worrying about what might happen," she said, drawing back to look into his eyes. "Love me now, like you said." That night, beneath the quilt Zach's mother had made, they came together as husband and wife for the first time. Zach was gentle, reverent, his touch igniting sensations Gabrielle had never known existed. Afterward, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, she felt truly alive for the first time since her diagnosis. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. "I didn't think I'd ever say those words to anyone, but I love you, Zachary Jameson." He lifted her chin, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight that spilled through the window. "Say it again." She smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I love you." "And I love you, Gabrielle Jameson, more than I ever thought possible." October brought a new routine. Each morning, Gabrielle would walk a little further around the property, building her strength. Zach taught her to ride properly, and soon she could manage short trips on her own. She began helping Mrs. Holloway with simpler cooking tasks, learning to make bread and preserves for the coming winter. "You're preparing like you'll be here to eat all this," Mrs. Holloway observed one afternoon as they sealed jars of blackberry jam. Gabrielle paused, a jar halfway to the shelf. "I'm trying to believe I will be." The older woman smiled, patting her hand. "Good. That's half the battle right there." When Dr. Peterson visited again at the end of October, he was visibly shocked by Gabrielle's progress. She greeted him at the door herself, dressed in a simple day dress, her hair neatly pinned up, no handkerchief in sight. "This is remarkable," he muttered as he listened to her lungs. "The rattle is almost gone. Your heart sounds stronger. Your color is excellent." "Does that mean she might survive the winter after all?" Zach asked, standing by the window, trying and failing to appear nonchalant. The doctor hesitated. "I've never seen a case of consumption reverse itself this way. It's not a cure, I want to be very clear about that. But," he added, seeing the hope in their faces, "yes, if this improvement continues, and if the winter is mild, Mrs. Jameson may very well see the spring." After he left, Zach swept Gabrielle into his arms, spinning her around the parlor until she was breathless with laughter instead of illness. "Careful," she admonished, though her eyes shone with joy. "You heard him, I'm not cured." "But you're better," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "And you're going to keep getting better." She leaned into him, savoring the solid strength of his body against hers. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it," he said fiercely. "Believe in us." November brought the first snow, light flurries that dusted the mountains like powdered sugar. Gabrielle watched from the window, wrapped in a shawl, a cup of tea warming her hands. "I've never seen snow so early," she commented as Zach entered the room, stamping his boots on the mat. "It'll be a hard winter," he replied, crossing to stand behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "But we're ready for it. Plenty of firewood, the cellar's full of preserves, and I've had Thomas reinforce the barn roof." She leaned back against him, savoring his warmth. "Do you think Dr. Peterson is right, that I might see the spring? I think you'll see many springs, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Many summers and autumns and winters, too. She turned in his arms, searching his face. Don't say that just to make me feel better. I need to know you're prepared just in case. His expression sobered. I'll never be prepared to lose you, Gabrielle, not if I live to be 100. But I promise you this, whether we have 50 years together or 5 months, I won't waste a single day. The first real snowstorm hit a week later, howling winds driving heavy snow against the windows, drifts piling against the doors. By morning, the ranch was blanketed in white, the world transformed into a pristine landscape that took Gabrielle's breath away. It's beautiful, she breathed, standing on the porch despite the cold. Zach smiled, pulling her closer to his side. Beautiful but dangerous. We'll be snowed in for a few days at least. She looked up at him, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Whatever shall we do to pass the time, Mr. Jameson? His answering grin sent warmth coursing through her. I'm sure we'll think of something, Mrs. Jameson. The days of their isolation passed in a cocoon of contentment. They made love by firelight, read to each other from Zach's collection of books, played chess, which Gabrielle invariably won, and talked about everything and nothing. Mrs. Holloway baked extra bread and made hearty stews that filled the house with savory aromas. And even Thomas, who normally took his meals in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands, joined them at the table for dinner. You've changed this place, Thomas told Gabrielle one evening as they sat around the table. It was just a house before, now it's a home again. Gabrielle felt tears prick at her eyes at the simple compliment. Thank you, Thomas. That means more to me than you know. When the snow finally stopped and the paths were cleared, Dr. Peterson made his way to the ranch, concerned about how Gabrielle had weathered the storm. His examination revealed what they already knew: she was still improving, defying all medical expectations. I've been reading the latest medical journals from Europe, he told them as he packed away his instruments. There's a theory gaining traction that fresh air, good nutrition, and rest can actually help the body fight consumption. Some doctors are sending patients to mountain sanitariums for precisely the kind of treatment you're getting here. So she might actually recover, Zach asked, hope evident in his voice. I wouldn't go that far, Dr. Peterson cautioned, but she might stabilize. Live with the disease rather than die from it, at least for a considerably longer period than I initially predicted. As December deepened, Gabrielle threw herself into preparing for Christmas. She hadn't expected to see the holiday, and now that it seemed within reach, she wanted to make it special. She enlisted Mrs. Holloway's help in baking cookies and pies, had Thomas cut a small pine tree to place in the parlor, and secretly worked on a gift for Zach whenever he was out tending to ranch business. What are you always sewing on when I'm not around? He asked one evening, catching her hastily tucking something into her sewing basket. Nothing, she said innocently. Just mending. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue, though his eyes held a knowing glint. Christmas Eve arrived with another light snowfall, turning the world outside their windows into a scene from a fairy tale. Zach built a roaring fire in the parlor, and Mrs. Holloway outdid herself with a feast of roast goose, potatoes, fresh bread, and mincemeat pie. Even the ranch hands were invited in for the meal, the long dining table filled with conversation and laughter. After everyone had gone, Mrs. Holloway to her cottage behind the main house, the hands to the bunkhouse. Zach and Gabrielle sat before the fire, a blanket draped over their laps, mugs of mulled cider warming their hands. Happy? Zach asked, watching the firelight play across her features. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. 6 months ago, I arrived in Keeler expecting to die. Instead, I found a reason to live. He set aside his mug and took her hands in his. I have something for you, a Christmas gift. It's not Christmas yet, she protested lightly. I can't wait, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. Open it. Gabrielle loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her hand. A delicate gold locket on a fine chain pooled in her palm, catching the firelight. It was my mother's, Zach explained as she examined it. Open it. She did, finding a tiny daguerreotype of Zach inside, his serious expression a stark contrast to the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. It's perfect, she whispered, tears threatening. Will you put it on me? He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. There's something else, he said, his voice suddenly nervous. Something I want to ask you. What is it? She asked, turning to face him fully. When we married, it was because we thought you were dying. Because I wanted to give you whatever comfort I could in the time you had left. He took a deep breath. But now it seems like we might have a future together after all, a real one. Gabrielle felt her heart quicken. Zach, what are you saying? I'm saying that I want to marry you again, he said in a rush. Not because you're dying, but because we're living. Because I want to spend whatever life we have together as real partners. Because I love you more today than I did when I first asked you, and I'll love you even more tomorrow. Tears spilled down Gabrielle's cheeks. But we're already married. Legally, yes, he acknowledged. But I want to make new vows, not promises made in the shadow of death, but promises made in the light of life. Will you marry me again, Gabrielle, this time with hope instead of desperation? She threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him backward. Yes, she breathed against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you again, Zachary Jameson. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Gabrielle woke early, slipping from the warmth of Zach's embrace to retrieve her gift from its hiding place. When he stirred, she was sitting beside him on the bed, a wrapped package in her lap. Merry Christmas, she said, bending to kiss him. He sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair, a smile spreading across his face. Merry Christmas, wife. She handed him the package. Your gift. I made it myself. Zach unwrapped the paper carefully, revealing a hand-stitched leather-bound book. Opening it, he found page after page of Gabrielle's neat handwriting, interspersed with small sketches. It's our story, she explained as he flipped through the pages. From the day we met until Christmas Eve, I wanted you to have something to remember me by if... Gabrielle, he interrupted gently, placing a finger against her lips. It's beautiful, but this isn't an ending, it's just the first chapter. She smiled through her tears. You're right, and I'll keep writing it for as long as I can. We'll write it together, he promised, pulling her down beside him. Every day, every year. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a blur of joy. They exchanged gifts with Mrs. Holloway and Thomas, sang carols around the piano that hadn't been played since Zach's mother died, and ate until they could barely move. That night, as they lay in bed, Gabrielle nestled against Zach's side. She felt a sense of peace wash over her. I never thought I could be this happy, she murmured, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. Even before I got sick, I never knew happiness like this existed. Zach captured her wandering hand, bringing it to his lips. This is just the beginning, he promised. Just wait until spring. January brought more snow and bitterly cold temperatures that kept everyone close to home. Gabrielle continued to improve, though the cold sometimes made her chest ache and her cough return briefly. Dr. Peterson's monthly visits confirmed what they could see for themselves. She was defying all medical expectations. It's not just the air and diet. the doctor mused during his January visit. Though those certainly help. It's you, he said to Zach. Or rather, what you've given her: purpose, hope, love. I've seen it before, rarely. The will to live can be a powerful medicine. February was harsh, with blizzards that howled around the house like hungry wolves, but inside was warm and secure. Gabrielle had taken over most of the household management, freeing Mrs. Holloway to focus on cooking and giving herself a sense of purpose. She kept the ledgers for the ranch, wrote letters to Zach's business associates, and even began teaching one of the younger ranch hands to read during the long winter evenings. "You'd have made a fine teacher," Zach observed one night as they prepared for bed. "I wanted to be," she admitted. "Before my parents died, I had plans to attend a women's college back east." "You still could," he suggested. "Not to leave, but to study. There are universities in San Francisco that admit women now." She looked at him in surprise. "You'd support that?" "Gabrielle, I'd support anything that makes you happy." He pulled her into his arms. "You've given me a life I never thought I'd have. The least I can do is help you build the life you dreamed of." March arrived with a thaw, the snow retreating up the mountainsides, the first hints of green appearing in the meadows. Gabrielle spent more time outdoors, her strength continuing to improve. She could now ride for an hour without tiring, and the handkerchief that had once been her constant companion remained tucked in a drawer, unused for weeks. "I want to renew our vows on the first day of spring," she told Zach one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "To celebrate surviving the winter." He squeezed her hand. "The first day of spring it is." The morning of March 20th dawned clear and mild, the air carrying the scent of damp earth and new growth. Gabrielle dressed in her best gown, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes and pinned fresh wildflowers in her hair. Zach waited for her on the porch, wearing the same suit he'd worn at their first wedding, though this time his face held joy instead of desperate hope. Mrs. Holloway, Thomas, and several of the ranch hands gathered in the yard, along with Dr. Peterson, who had made the journey specifically for the occasion. There was no preacher this time. Instead, Zach and Gabrielle stood facing each other, hands joined, speaking the vows they had written themselves. "Zachary Jameson," Gabrielle began, her voice clear and strong, "9 months ago, you married a dying woman and promised to love her for whatever time she had left. You gave me a home, a purpose, and a love I never expected to find. Today, I stand before you not as a woman with one foot in the grave, but as a woman looking toward the future, our future. I vow to love you every day we are granted together, to be your partner in all things, to face whatever challenges come our way with the same courage and faith you have shown me. You saved my life in more ways than one, and I promise to make that life worth saving." Tears glistened in Zach's eyes as he spoke his own vows. "Gabrielle Reed Jameson, when I first saw you step off that stagecoach, something in me recognized something in you, though I couldn't have named it then. I know now it was the beginning of the greatest love I'll ever know. I married you thinking I was giving you comfort in your final days. Instead, you have given me a lifetime of joy condensed into months, and the promise of many more years to come. I vow to continue loving you with every breath in my body, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, to be the husband you deserve for all the days we have together. You came to Keeler looking for healing, but you have healed me in ways I didn't know I needed." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands purchased during Zach's last trip to town, and sealed their renewed vows with a kiss that held all the promise of their uncertain but hopeful future. The celebration afterward was far grander than their first wedding. The ranch hands had set up tables in the yard, Mrs. Holloway had prepared a feast, and someone produced a fiddle, filling the afternoon with music and dancing. "Are you tired?" Zach asked as the sun began to set, noting the flush in Gabrielle's cheeks after several dances. "A little," she admitted. "But it's a good tired, the kind that comes from joy, not illness." He led her to a quiet spot away from the celebration, where they could see the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Happy, completely," she said, leaning against him. "It feels like a dream sometimes, that I'm here, that I'm actually getting better." "It's no dream," he assured her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Dr. Peterson says you're a medical miracle, said he's writing to colleagues back east about your case." She smiled, tipping her face up to his. "I'm not a miracle, Zach. I'm just a woman who found something to live for." As spring deepened into summer, Gabrielle's health continued to improve. There were still days when she tired easily, when the lingering damage to her lungs made itself known, but they were increasingly rare. Dr. Peterson's visits became less frequent as her condition stabilized, and by June, he pronounced her as recovered as anyone can be from consumption. "You understand this doesn't mean you're completely cured," he cautioned. "The disease can remain dormant for years, only to resurface if your health is compromised. You'll need to continue taking good care of yourself, plenty of fresh air, nutritious food, adequate rest." "I'll make sure of it," Zach promised, his hand protective on Gabrielle's shoulder. She smiled up at him. "We both will. I have too much to live for now." Life settled into a rhythm of contentment. Gabrielle's days were filled with managing the household, riding with Zach to check on the cattle, corresponding with universities about potential courses of study, and learning the business of ranching. The nights were spent in the circle of Zach's arms, their love deepening with each passing day. In August, just over a year after she'd arrived in Keeler, Gabrielle made a discovery that filled her with equal parts joy and trepidation. "I'm pregnant," she told Zach one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He went completely still beside her. "Are you certain?" Mrs. Holloway confirmed it, she said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "She says I'm about 2 months along. The baby should come in March." Zach turned to face her fully, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. "Gabrielle, are you? Is this safe for you? With your lungs?" She took his hand and placed it over hers on her abdomen. "Dr. Peterson said there's some risk, but many women with consumption have healthy pregnancies." "My health is better than it's been in years. I want this, Zach. I want our child." He pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "Then we'll have this baby," he whispered, "and I'll take care of both of you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Gabrielle experiencing only the usual discomforts. Her body, which had been so frail just a year earlier, seemed to bloom with new life, her skin glowing, her eyes bright. Dr. Peterson checked on her monthly, each time expressing amazement at her continued good health. "The human body is a remarkable thing," he said during his February visit, listening to both Gabrielle's lungs and the baby's heartbeat. "Medically speaking, you shouldn't be here, Mrs. Jameson, let alone preparing to bring new life into the world. Yet here you are, healthier than many women who have never had a day's illness." Winter passed without the dreaded resurgence of her symptoms, and as March approached, the ranch prepared for the arrival of its newest member. Zach converted a room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, painstakingly crafting a cradle from pine harvested on their property. Mrs. Holloway knitted blankets and tiny garments, and even the ranch hands contributed, one whittling wooden toys, another fashioning a rocking horse. On the morning of March 19, 1877, almost exactly a year after they had renewed their vows, Gabrielle went into labor. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, and as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains on March 20, the first day of spring, their son was born. "He's perfect," Gabrielle whispered as she held him for the first time, counting his tiny fingers, marveling at the tuft of dark hair that matched his father's. Zach sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently stroking his son's cheek. "What shall we call him?" Gabrielle looked up at her husband, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Thomas," she suggested, "after the man who's been like a father to you, and William for my father." "Thomas William Jameson," Zach tested the name, a smile spreading across his face. "It's perfect. He's perfect." "You're perfect." She leaned against him, exhausted but exhilarated. "We made it, Zach. We actually made it to spring." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And many more springs to come, my love. Many more springs to come." 5 years later, the Jameson Ranch had grown to twice its original size. The main house had been expanded to accommodate not only Thomas, now a rambunctious 5-year-old, but also his 2-year-old sister, Elizabeth. Gabrielle, having completed several courses of study through correspondence with a women's college in San Francisco, had started a small school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring properties. The consumption never returned. There were occasional winter colds that lingered longer than they should, moments of fatigue that reminded her of her brush with death. But Gabrielle remained healthy and strong, defying all medical expectations. On the 10th anniversary of her arrival in Keeler, Gabrielle sat at her desk, opening the leather-bound journal she'd given Zach that first Christmas. Over the years, they had filled it with their story, the births of their children, the expansion of the ranch, the small daily joys and challenges that made up a life together. She dipped her pen in ink and began to write. 10 years ago today, I stepped off a stagecoach in Keeler, California, expecting to find a place to die. Instead, I found a place to live, a man to love, and a future I never dared imagine. The town doctor said I'd die by winter. My husband married me anyway and said, then love me now, and so I did. So I do. So I will, for all the days we are granted together. From the doorway, Zach watched his wife writing, the afternoon sun turning her auburn hair to fire. Thomas and Elizabeth played at her feet, building a castle from wooden blocks. The scene before him, this family he never expected to have, this happiness he never thought to find, filled his heart to bursting. "Mama, look," Elizabeth called, placing the final block atop their creation. Gabrielle set down her pen and turned to her daughter, her smile radiant. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Her eyes lifted, finding Zach in the doorway. The love that passed between them was as tangible as a touch, as enduring as the mountains outside their window. "Come join us, Papa," Thomas called, noticing his father. Zach crossed the room, dropping to his knees beside his children. Gabrielle's hand found his, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "I love you," she mouthed silently over their children's heads. "And I love you," he replied, squeezing her hand. "Now and always." Outside, spring bloomed across the ranch, a testament to renewal, to second chances, to the enduring power of love that defied death itself. Inside, surrounded by the family she never expected to have, Gabrielle Reed Jameson, once given months to live, embraced the lifetime she had found instead.